Kwekwe Ulukut Tansi. Hello, bonjour. Gaxika from Bella Bella First Nation, surrounded by water in Heiltsuk territory. I first do want to acknowledge and thank Chief Slett for welcoming me to her community and kindly letting me use her office for this announcement that affects all First Nations in Canada. This is a wonderful time to celebrate, particularly surrounded by water and with the team here today. I'm grateful to be joined by Chief Whetung from Curve Lake First Nation, Chief Spence from Tataskweyak First Nation, Chief Moonias from Neskantaga First Nation, nice to see you, as well as I understand some of the younger members of your community. Together, we're here to announce that we have reached an agreement in principle to resolve a class action lawsuit outside court related to safe drinking water in First Nations communities. And again, to underscore this outside the courts, grâce à un dialogue ouvert, une coopération et un partenariat continu, nous franchissons une étape clé vers notre engagement qui est de veiller à ce que chaque membre des Premières Nations ait un accès fiable à l'eau potable, salubre et propre maintenant et à l'avenir. Through this dialogue and process of cooperation and partnership, we're taking key steps towards our commitment that every First Nations person should have reliable access to safe, clean drinking water now and in the future. This agreement addresses several important concerns identified by First Nations, including $1.5 billion in compensations for individuals deprived of clean drinking water, the creation of a $400 million First Nations Economic and Cultural Restoration Fund to support community-level efforts, a renewed commitment to Canada's action plan for the lifting of all long-term drinking water advisories on public systems on reserve, the creation of a First Nations Advisory Committee on Safe Drinking Water, support for First Nations to develop their own safe drinking water bylaws and initiatives, as well as a forward commitment to support reliable access to safe drinking water on reserve with $6 billion in targeted supports, including capital and operations and maintenance. And finally, the modernization of Canada's First Nations drinking water legislation. We've been clear. Our commitment is to ensure that all First Nations communities have access to clean, safe, and reliable drinking water. This remains the same and is expanded from the commitment made in 2015. We've made real progress in partnership with First Nations since November 2015, but much work remains, and the chiefs here today will speak about it. As of July 28th, 2021, First Nations with support from Indigenous Services Canada have lifted 108 long-term drinking water advisories from the 105 that were in effect in 2015. In addition, and key to this commitment, 186 short-term drinking water advisories, which become long-term in a year if not remedied, have been prevented from becoming long-term. And projects are underway in 32 communities to resolve the remaining 51 long-term drinking water advisories. We will continue to work with all First Nations, including the nations here today, Tataskweyak Cree Nation, Curve Lake First Nation, and Neskantaga First Nation to address their water concerns and more, and to develop sustainable long-term solutions to ensure the ongoing sustainability of water and wastewater on reserve, including the training of operators from communities. La conclusion de cet accord témoigne de la persévérance et du dévouement de la résilience des Premières Nations à travers le pays. Chef Doreen Spence, chef Emily Whetung, et à la fois le chef Chris et maintenant le chef Wayne Moonias, je tiens à vous dire, miigwech, thank you pour tout le travail accompli pour vos collectivités et le partenariat qui continuera. Ensemble, nous irons de l'avant dans un esprit de réconciliation pour nous assurer que chaque communauté des Premières Nations ait un accès à de l'eau potable, salubre et propre pour des générations à venir. I want to thank you all. Miigwech, Yanamik, merci, thank you, merci. And I believe it is now up to Chief Whetung to say a few words. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Miller. Since the day I was born, my community has known that the supply and quality of water was insufficient to carry us into the future. Growing up, avoiding tap water was the way of life. Don't put your toothbrush in it. Don't rinse your mouth. Make sure you have enough bottled water to get through the long weekend. And people would get sick from the water. I got sick, and my family got sick. This way of life seemed unending, and simply put, just the way things had to be. In 2014, and again in 2016, the lack of water took on a whole new meaning for me. I became a mother. I have 2 sweet little boys, and my entire world changed. Every parent out there will understand how that changes your world. Every parent living on an Indian reserve will cringe as they think of the challenges I now had to face. It is no longer enough to simply plan for the next long weekend. There isn't enough water in the ground for my children to choose to live at home when they're adults, starting families of their own. My grandchildren would have to live away from me because they wouldn't have clean water to drink. In 2019, I had the opportunity to make a difference, to become part of the history of water advocacy my community has undertaken for nearly 40 years. For some perspective, that's 20 elections for our chief and council, countless staff members looking for creative solutions. For one particular staff member in our community, this has been his entire career. He started working on bringing clean water to our community when he was a college intern. I decided that it was my turn to take up the advocacy. I ran for chief as my great-grandfather and his grandfather before him had done. In July 2019, when I took office, I had a mandate from my community to find a new way to bring clean water home. In October of 2019, the amazing council that I work with supported me in bringing our water concerns to court in the form of a class action. We sought support from our leadership organizations nationwide and eventually made our action into a national class action. In February 2020, when I met Minister Miller for the first time, we had a conversation about how the water situation in First Nations needed to change. We discussed how ending long-term water advisories simply didn't accomplish meaningful access to clean water. I explained that in order to be immersed in our language and traditions, our children needed to grow up on the only land base that we have been left with, and they deserve to grow up with clean water. I'm overwhelmed to stand here today, 2 years after my community trusted me with bringing clean water home, 18 months after my first conversation with Minister Miller. I stand here today with the chief of Tataskweyak and the chief of Neskantaga. We have made a difference. We've reached an agreement that contains commitments to deliver the quality and quantity of water that most Canadians take for granted. We have reached an agreement with enforceable timelines, built-in dispute resolution clauses that ensure that our response times meet the same urgency of each situation. This agreement provides compensation for individuals who have been denied access to clean water. It creates an economic and cultural restoration fund for the loss of opportunity and culture when we were without the necessary resources to practice our traditions and grow our economies. It includes the modernization of Canada's drinking water legislation. This agreement is a commitment of at least $6 billion to support reliable access to safe drinking water on reserves. And it allows First Nations the autonomy to govern water in our own communities. It feels like this agreement was reached at lightning speed, but in reality, it has taken generations of advocacy, and I am so honored to be a part of the resolution. Miigwech.
Thank you, Chief Whetung. Chief Spence, whenever you're ready, please go ahead.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to thank acknowledge Minister Miller's comments and also Chief Whetung. Tataskweyak Cree Nation is located on the shores of Split Lake, Manitoba. We have a population of about 2,400 plus people. We have been on a boil watery advisory beginning 2017, which became long-term in 2018. A water feasibility study has been completed to study alternatives to address TCN's long-term priorities. The Tataskweyak Cree Nation has been demanding a new source of pipe water from another source. This is Ashian Lake, which is located about 8 to 10 kilometers away from our community. Tataskweyak has been under a long-term drinking advisory for over 4 years. Every day since this advisory has been happening, we've been having to live with undrinkable water from our taps. We have bottled water delivered to our homes. Our water source is contaminated and making our people sick. Not having clean, safe drinking water to drink has had some devastating and traumatic consequences on every generation in our community. Some people have left or relocated elsewhere. The water has harmed our spiritual relationship and cultural practices with water. It has limited our ability to grow and develop as a community. The water has also caused skin rashes among our children and community members and other underlying health issues. Tataskweyak is under a state of emergency due to a number of youth suicides that we've had. In the last month, we've had 3 young men that we've lost in the community. Having this water crisis has created amongst us has created a declining health and wellness of our community. Sorry, I'm just getting emotional here. Hang on. Having the water crisis amongst us has certainly played a role in the declining health and wellness of our community. Children do not even swim in our water anymore. And we are all aware that in all First Nations that water is life and we consider it very sacred. Many children, many of our members do not even drink the tap water, and if they do, it's because they cannot afford, to buy their own bottled water. We've always had this trust of the water for many, many years. Like, I'm 50 now, and since I've been living there in the last 30 years or so, we don't drink the water. And even my own children and my grandson, they only drink bottled water. And I know that's in many other families as well. So I just wanted to share that. But this agreement in principle is an important symbol of Canada's recognition of the wrongs that have been done to our First Nations who have been denied access to clean and reliable drinking water. The commitment made by Canada in the agreement in principle signals a new era for Tataskweyak Cree Nation and other First Nations across Canada. I know that this agreement in principle still has to be finalized, and I know that we still have a lot of work ahead of us, but I would like to commend both Chief Whetung and Chief Moonias for being part of this class action, and for all the other First Nations that have joined I consider this a victory for our people because we deserve clean water like every other Canadian. And I'm hoping that, with the work that has to follow in settling this agreement, that everybody benefits so that it will relieve our members, that don't have to worry about not having to drink clean water. But well, all in all, I guess for Canada, I'm glad that you guys, have acknowledged that you guys have committed a wrong, and you are moving forward in terms of reconciliation and trying to make something benefit our people. But I just want to end by saying that. That's it.
Thank you so much for sharing, Chief Spence. And Chief Moonias, whenever you're ready, please go ahead.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, Minister Miller. Good afternoon, Chief Dunk and Chief Spence, and everybody that's listening and watching this press conference. Neskantaga First Nation, as you know, some of you know, has gone through a lot when it comes to the water crisis, when it comes to the conditions, what we faced as a First Nation, our people. And I wanted to speak to the public, to those that are listening, that are watching this press conference, the harms and the lives that have been lost. I get emotional when I talk about this issue because it's important. It really does impact our people, our kids, our elders, our women, our homes. And as you can see, Neskantaga First Nation has been with this water crisis for close to 3 decades, closing in on 27 years. We often wonder in our community why it has taken so long to provide something for our First Nation. Still to this day, our community is under a boil water advisory. Still to this day, our water treatment plant is incomplete and unable to provide a safe, clean drinking water that everybody else in this country is able to get. Our community has suffered a lot due to the inaction, the unwillingness of past governments and governments of today. Because today, a young mother, 24 years old, still is suffering today with her 2 kids, with her rashes. When the water touches her feet, she's filled with pain. That is something that still happens today. We have lost many lives to suicide. Again, a mother. And this is what has caused things, to the harms that has caused to our community. Because of lack of drinking water in our community, she had to get water where the RO, or reverse osmosis unit, was stationed. She went just over half hour. During that time, she lost her daughter. And that's the realities what our people are facing back home and in other communities. The hopelessness, the distrust of government failing to act. Why did it take a community like Neskantaga close to 27 years to get to this stage? Why did we have to lose lives? Why did we have to share our experiences, what we are facing in our community and in the rest of our communities in Canada? We say we live in a rich nation, a nation that cares, a nation that treats people with dignity. That is something that Neskantaga, the people of Neskantaga, have not been able to have. Today, the struggle and the pain of our people continues. That's why we're calling on the government to uphold the promises, the commitments that they've made to our First Nations. A child, a 10-year-old child in our community, raised these issues in our community, to speak for our community, to ask the government, to ask Canada, clean drinking water should not be something that is not there in our community. She gave a passionate speech in our community saying that why does she have to fight for something so basic, so accessible by many, but not in communities like Neskantaga and other First Nation communities in this country. We have seen so much. We have seen the pain of and suffering of our people. And that is the reason why I'm raising these issues. That is the reason why this cannot happen again, especially in this country that is so rich in resources in so many ways. Why does our people in Neskantaga and other places that have BWAs that lack the access to clean, safe drinking water, why does this have to happen? Why did we have to sue the government in order to get this thing to where it is today? We have suffered so much. We have lost so much. We have endured so much. But yet, our community continues to be resilient in Neskantaga and First Nations across this country. We know how hard it is if you don't have the basic necessities of life. We say water is life. Water breeds life. Water produces many things to grow. That is the same things that we need in order for our communities to be able to grow, to be able to live in a quality of life that is the same in other parts of this country. A lot of people in this country take this rich resource for granted. But our community, for close to 27 years, has not been able to have that opportunity for our kids to be able to access, to be able to turn on their taps, to be able to say, Mom, Dad, Grandpa, I like this water that's coming out of our taps. Instead, today, people are afraid. People are afraid to take baths, to take showers, because of the things that does to their bodies. That must change. It must change. It must recognize that our people in our communities, the people in Neskantaga, are also humans, are also people that require this important source for their lives, for their kids, for their families. If you come to our community, these are the stories and these are the things that you're going to see firsthand. That's why we are talking about these issues today. We know this is an important step that has been taken on this agreement in principle process. But we know and we are aware promises and commitments have been made before. And our people have been on the wrong side of that, of those commitments before. So that's why we're calling on Canada to live up to their commitments, to live up to the promises that they've made to our people for so long, to provide clean access to drinking water in our communities, in our youth, in our babies, to our elders that are struggling today. Some have to walk a kilometer or two just to access clean, safe drinking water. Some have to get bottled drinking water to be delivered at their doorsteps. That continues today, and that must change. I have a lady here that has worked tirelessly in our community that continues to see the impacts that our water crisis has done to our people for over a quarter century. 26 plus years is too long for a community to be in this crisis. Like many other communities across the country, we know that this is something that has long been denied, and that must change. In saying that, we want to welcome this opportunity where this AIP process could lead us. But we also have to be mindful that the current state of our community and our communities in this country, it must change. It must produce the results that we say we're going to provide, that's going to be provided for our people. We cannot have stories where we're losing lives due to hopelessness and lack of access to clean, safe drinking water. We must do something. We must act. We are asking Canada to do the same. Miigwech, thank you. And then I'll hand it over to our community member. Her name is Gloria Adlakan. She's been in the community and she's experienced and seen a lot. And we'll give her an opportunity to share a few words, experiences, the impacts that our crisis has done to our people. So, Miigwech, I'll hand it over to Gloria Adlakan.
Hello, my name is Gloria Adlakan, and I lived all my life in Neskantaga, Lansdowne, also known as Lansdowne, I guess. And I've been with the health and social for 10 plus years already, and I've seen a lot where I work, where babies to adults come to the clinic with with the rashes and all that. And I've talked to some with the depression and anger with what water has done to them. And it's really sad to see them like that. And I have my children too at home, and they can't even use tap water. They're just really scared to use the tap water because of what it does to them when they bathe with it. They get really itchy after taking bath or shower, and I feel sorry for them. Even me, I go through that when I shower back home. And it makes a big difference once we come to the town when I use the water here. It's not like I don't get these red spots on my skin after I shower. And it's very heartbreaking for us to be going through this with the water boil advisory. And I've been through so much too with everything that's been going on in my reserve. It's just very heartbreaking that we have to see these people, us, go through with this water issue. It creates a lot of mental health too. Mental health. I recently lost my daughter to about two years ago, and we've been going through so much. She used to always mention about the water, how she didn't like it. She always complained about the water. How come we don't have good drinking water, Mom? That's what she used to always say to me. Always saying that I'm getting tired of this, taking showers. Always, my skin is, she would get rashes all the time. And, and I've seen babies too with rashes. That just breaks my heart seeing them in pain with rashes. All they give them is like cream. Keep washing them. That's what the nurses say, keep washing them. Keep putting cream. But that doesn't work. Because it's the water. And it's very, very expensive to buy bottled water every time you want to bathe a baby or even children, adults. Very expensive to buy bottles. It's not like in a city where you go to Walmart and buy $2 for 24 small bottled water. It's not like that up there. Very expensive, especially with people that live with OW, Ontario Works Welfare. They can't afford to buy bottled water. That's how the mental health impacts people back home. And I think that's all I got to say right now. Thank you.
I got you. Thank you.
Thank you, Gloria. Thank you, Chief Moonias. We'll now take questions from journalists, one question and one follow-up. Nous allons maintenant répondre aux questions des journalistes, une question et une question de suivi. Opérateur, première question, s'il vous plaît.
Thank you. Merci. If you have a question, please press *1 on your device keypad. Si vous désirez poser une question, veuillez s'il vous plaît appuyer sur les touches étoile 1 de votre appareil. And the first question, la première question, Patrick White, the Global and Mail, please go ahead.
Hi, Minister Miller, I'd just like to, relay Chief Moonias' question. Why has it taken court action such as this to get such a significant remedy to such a basic need?
Thank you, Patrick, for the question. I think what we need to realize today, despite the work that needs to be done, and in light of the large settlement for harms that have occurred, as Chief Moonias and Chief Spence and Whetung have highlighted, go back as far as a quarter of a century, where youth have grown up without having to have access to clean water. Is this has a dual component, one in reparations, as so far as money can replace the harm that's occurred, as well as the going forward commitment of $6 billion to get the work done over and above lifting long-term water advisories that communities take that difficult decision to lift. We made that commitment as a government, and for the last 5 years have been working to lift with significant results to show, but much more to do. And when I was asked to serve as Indigenous Services Minister, just prior to the outbreak of a historic pandemic, I sat down with my team and said, "What are we doing right? What are we doing wrong? What do we do to accompany communities in their fight to lift long-term water advisories and get the capital resources in?" And what we heard loud and clear is some of the stuff that Chief Moonias and the member of his community have echoed, as well as Chief Spence and Chief Whetung, that it had to go over and above simply a capital investment and the lifting of an advisory. Chief Whetung didn't have an advisory for the commitment that we are going to go down the road with her today, for example. They did have one, but there was a much greater need in the community that reflected the need to have safe and reliable, clean drinking water. This commitment begins to get us there. We've also heard, and the discussions that I've had with Neskantaga will stay confidential between us, and Chief Moonias can perhaps speak to them, but I've made a number of commitments to the community to assist them on that path to lifting the long-term water advisory, as well as the needs that they have with respect to wastewater. And as well as training their own people so that they are the pride of the community. And the reality is we're not there yet. You can produce clean and safe drinking water, but the community has to take that difficult decision in the face of a quarter of a century of unsafe drinking water to lift that. And that does take time. There are impacts, as was highlighted, on mental health. So I could sit here and try and give you all the excuses in the world, but there is no credible excuse for countries such as Canada to take this long. That said, our government has made those investments and has worked outside the court process with these communities. Have some of the most sophisticated lawyers in the country that came to the table with us, and we were willing to sit down and hammer something out. And this is the product of that. We don't want to be in court because we're on the same page. This isn't an adversarial process, but it has become so, sadly. So Patrick, a bit of a long answer to say, this is a day to celebrate these investments and the work that needs to be done, as well as reparations for past harms of prior governments. And there will be a process for investments, making sure there's a consistent stream of supports. Again, going back to some of the things that I heard when I became Minister of Indigenous Services, is many communities were saying, "Where are you going to be after March of 2021? When you made that promise? And is it just limited to long-term water advisories? Why not expand? Why not cover buildings that aren't covered by the long-term water advisory?" So this is a broader package, and we need to recognize that. And it is also a binding commitment of the Government of Canada to get it done. And that goes to continue to building the relationship of trust that has often been far too thin. And that's the extent of my answer, Patrick. Thank you.
Yeah, I guess just as a follow-up, you mentioned the March 2021 date. Is there any new date as to when all of these advisories might be lifted?
As I've said before, we focused on lift dates, and we focused on one date for all of Canada. What I've tried to do is for Canadians at the website that we have that provides up-to-date information is to allow people to see what I see. And you can go on each project for each community where there remains lifts to be yet to be resolved. We have some positive news in the next month or few weeks with respect to communities that have had to shut down because of COVID and that have many water advisories associated to them. So I'm very confident about the next few months. There are other communities, Chippewas of the Nawash, for example, where we've made an additional commitment to $35 million to expand their project, and rightly so. They have chosen not to take a short to medium term solution that would allow them to lift the long-term water advisory. And we will, and that's their choice. It's up to them. We will accompany them in their long-term advisory lift, and the commitment that we've made is to invest another $35 million. Those are some of the ones that still remain outstanding, and we'll have that information available for each community on the website. We're down to the short strokes. There are other communities that are producing clean water, but the lift has not been affected yet. That's the decision of the community for a number of the reasons that have been highlighted today. So this is not as simple as Ottawa imposing a deadline on itself and saying we're going to do it. There's a partnership here. We need to reflect it, and we need to reflect it, the spirit in which I have to do my job every day, which is respecting self-determination, something perhaps we haven't done in the past.
Thank you, Patrick. Operator, next question, please.
Thank you. Merci. La prochaine question est de Pierre Chantarneau, la presse canadienne. À vous la parole.
Bonjour, M. Miller. Monsieur le ministre, j'aimerais savoir juste d'abord du côté des chiffres. Ce sont des sommes considérables. J'aimerais savoir si ça couvre pour l'ensemble des Premières Nations du Canada et quels sont les critères pour déterminer quelle sera l'indemnisation à terme de communautés ou d'individus.
Merci pour la question fort pertinente. Je laisserai les détails aux avocats. Il reste encore beaucoup de travail à mettre ensemble pour avoir une impression des gens qui seront couverts. Le chiffre avec lequel on travaille en termes de communauté surpasse les 200 communautés. Avec une compensation individuelle afférente à chaque membre de la communauté. Alors, ça dépendra des personnes qui choisiront de faire partie de l'action collective. Donc, il y a des chiffres qui varieront dépendant de ces facteurs-là principalement. Et évidemment, oui, ça reflète un investissement pour les communautés qui sont couvertes par un avis d'ébullition d'eau qui touche la responsabilité fédérale, donc c'est-à-dire, si je me souviens bien, un système qui couvre 5 maisons et plus. Et c'est un investissement significatif qui représente en fait 2 fois ce qu'on a déjà investi, c'est-à-dire 4 milliards, donc un 8 milliards supplémentaires sur les années à venir avec la compensation à l'intérieur de cette somme. Alors, des sommes très importantes, des sommes qui relèvent d'un droit le plus profond, c'est-à-dire d'avoir de l'eau. Et donc, c'est quelque chose qu'on reflète aujourd'hui, mais pour les détails, on va se remettre aux avocats qui pourront nous en parler, mais c'est des détails qui restent à venir, dépendant surtout des personnes qui feront partie, finalement, du recours collectif.
I'm happy to speak to the details from the legal perspective. It's Michael Rosenberg of McCarthy Tetro Class Counsel. The class is composed of 142,000 people from 258 First Nations. And so those individuals and their First Nations are the chief beneficiaries of this historic agreement. They together represent about 750,000 person years lived under long-term drinking water advisories. And so they are the ones who will be compensated and who will benefit from the forward-looking commitments that the minister has just explained. In terms of how the compensation will be distributed, it will depend on the number of years that individuals lived under a long-term drinking water advisory. It will depend on the remoteness of their communities to reflect the additional hardships faced by remote communities. And ultimately, the compensation paid to First Nations will be in proportion to the compensation paid to their members.
Okay. Thank you very much. En sous-question, M. Miller, est-ce que, je comprends que vous n'avez pas d'échéancier, parce que ça ne revient pas à vous de prendre des décisions, mais bien aux Premières Nations elles-mêmes, mais est-ce que votre engagement, c'est que toutes les Premières Nations du Canada aient de l'eau potable d'ici, bon, je sais pas, moi, il doit quand même y avoir, ils n'attendront pas un autre 10 ou 15 ans, là. Est-ce que votre engagement, c'est que tout le monde ait de l'eau potable dans un délai relativement court? And I would like to ask Chiefs Whetung, Spence, and Moonias, do you trust the federal government to come through on this commitment?
Sorry, I don't have a
Go ahead, Chief.
translator, so I'm not sure what the French part was, but go ahead.
The English part was whether you trust us, but I'll answer the part in French. Certainement, l'engagement qu'on fait aujourd'hui, c'est les communautés qui sont desservies par les systèmes fédéraux de distribution d'eau, c'est-à-dire au-delà de 200 communautés qui sont affectées. Sachez évidemment qu'il y a des communautés qui ont de l'eau potable, qui sont servies par le gouvernement fédéral, mais il y a d'autres modalités de transport et d'accès à l'eau potable dans les communautés qui existent. Alors, il y a des éléments de complexité qui font que ma réponse, bien que l'engagement soit substantiel, en est une qui réalise qu'il y a des communautés qui sont desservies par d'autres sources, que ce soit en raison de la distance des maisons qui sont touchées. Alors, c'est un élément très complexe à répondre, mais quand même, en ce qui a trait à l'engagement fédéral, qui jusqu'à date n'était pas suffisant, là, on rencontre nos obligations et on assume nos responsabilités. Écoutez, il y a des avis d'ébullition à long terme et à court terme, des centaines et peut-être des milliers à travers le Canada. La réalité auquel on fait face, c'est que plus souvent que non, ce sont les communautés autochtones qui sont touchées. Il y a beaucoup de standards d'eau qui ont augmenté de par les années. Mais la réalité, c'est que le gouvernement n'a pas été à l'appui. Alors aujourd'hui, on passe à une compensation historique et on assume notre responsabilité avec des mécanismes juridiques, le cas échéant, si on faillit à notre devoir. Alors, très important, c'est un commitment qui était très important de la part de notre gouvernement dès le début. On a fait face à une sous-capitalisation destructive des dernières années au moins auparavant. Puis ça a eu des résultats qu'on peut voir aujourd'hui. Force est de constater il reste encore du travail à faire, mais c'est un engagement profond et solennel qu'on fait aujourd'hui envers les communautés autochtones. Vous avez you asked a question on trust. Trust is perhaps the biggest barrier to our relationship right here. It's why we even went down the road of a court process, because there are communities that felt not well served by Canada. And today, not wanting to drag out in an adversarial position where we have far too often been, and the reality is a different government may have decided to go into court and to fight this. We're not. We agree with the communities and we want to get that water into the communities, but there needs to be a binding process, a mechanism with teeth. That's what the communities asked for, and we're glad to oblige.
Thank you. And I think, Minister Miller, I would just echo that sentiment that the history of agreements with First Nations in Canada is not always a great one. And so that was absolutely a part of the need to pursue a court action. However, I think the resolution of multiple class actions in recent Canadian history demonstrates that these are enforceable agreements, and that's what we're looking forward to seeing is the enforceability. But it was absolutely a quick process to get to this point. So miigwech for that.
Merci, Pierre. Can we have the next question, please?
Thank you. Merci. The next question is from Brett Forrester, APTN News. Please go ahead.
Hello, everybody. My question is on that topic of enforceability. Mr. Miller or perhaps Mr. Rosenberg, can you offer some more details about the enforceability and accountability mechanisms built into this deal? In other words, once this settlement is finalized, what would happen if a community then lapses into a long-term advisory or fails to have access to clean water?
Yeah, and I'll dust off my my already poor legal skills from a prior career to perhaps answer this question. But I will also make the mistake of referring it over to opposing counsel for their answers. But Brett, having an enforceable mechanism was key as part of these discussions to have teeth ongoing if a government were to fail. We've made a number of significant commitments, but a number of comments that we've received from a number of chiefs is if there's a change of government, that might not be the case, and that is a real and present worry. This isn't something that should be partisan. Any single government that is aspiring to lead this country needs to make these commitments and more to Indigenous communities. We've made a number, but we've got a number that we need to keep. That goes to the point that I made earlier with respect to trust and having an enforcement mechanism in place that we're going to gladly be part of is something that will allow, for example, and Michael can elaborate this, for a party if they are breached to move towards summary judgment as opposed to getting in there and fighting it out publicly about points in contention. This is an agreement; it's binding, it has teeth. We expect it to do so, and I think more importantly, Canadians and Indigenous peoples most importantly expect that to be the case. Over to you, Michael.
Thank you, Minister. The crown jewel of this agreement is Canada's commitment to make all reasonable efforts to ensure that class members have regular access to clean drinking water in their homes. And what's contemplated is that in those class member First Nations where that's not the case today, they will have an opportunity to speak with the federal government and present their ideas as to how the commitment could be met in their community. And the hope is that there will be an agreement on the measures taken to reach that commitment in every class member community. If there's not agreement, then what's contemplated is there will be a dispute resolution mechanism, as the minister says. It's one that will respect Indigenous legal traditions. It will be acceptable and accessible to class members, and it will deliver a swift resolution to any disagreement so that the community and Canada can move forward with the necessary measures to ensure that class members, that the residents of that community have access to clean drinking water in their homes. If you think about it, this is really about converting what has up until now been seen by some as good governance or goodwill into rights that class members can rely on and can enforce. And that's the aim of the mechanism that I've described.
Sorry, Michael, it's Scott Farnley speaking from the Department of Justice. I would agree with Michael and indicate that he's summarized the planned dispute resolution process accurately, and it's something that's intended to move quickly and to respect Indigenous traditions. But at this time, we don't have further details. That's a matter that's still subject to negotiation, and something that's intended to form part of the broader settlement agreement that the parties are working on right now.
Thank you. As a follow-up, Minister Miller, I understand your department is trying to shift the focus away from, one overarching deadline towards what you describe as the broader commitment of the Government of Canada. But do you have any regrets about how the Liberal government in your department has handled this file since coming into power?
I sit here as the Minister of Indigenous Services for the past 18, 19 months. A large part of it has been dominated by a world pandemic. I regret that we were in this situation in the first place. this is a government, and the Prime Minister, first and foremost, stood up and said, we're going to get this fixed, and undertook to do something that was bold and frankly reflective of a basic right. That has a lot of power in this country. It has power to compel the civil service, first and foremost, to hold our obligations up vis-a-vis Indigenous peoples. I think that's a powerful message. And I'm proud of the fact that he did it. I'm proud of the fact that when there were amounts that were perhaps seen sufficient for the capital investments to, according to the strict terms of what is needed from our perspective to lift the long-term water advisory, we said to ourselves, we're not doing enough. We doubled down, and then we tripled down, and now we've quadrupled down. And that's something I think that shows the relentlessness of this government to put in not only political capital, but financial capital to it. This is a process, Brett, that has always been about building trust. It's not about shifting the focus. First Nations, Indigenous communities said, your focus needs to be on us and not your deadline. Where are you going to be after March 2021? We need to expand those water systems. We need operators that are the pride of their communities. We weren't doing that. So sitting down and saying to yourself, why do we need to increase operations and maintenance 2-3 times by 2022, 2023? Getting ahead of this and making sure that we are honoring those commitments and being quite honest and frank to all Canadians that expect this to happen, that we're going to do it. And so these communities said to themselves, we're going to use our legal rights. And we said, we'll sit down at the table and hash this out and make sure that it reflects the needs. This ongoing commitment is key. It was key to the success of this agreement in principle, and will be most importantly key to making sure that everyone has clean water. This is about historic reparation for harms done by past governments. It's also about the future. It's also about hope, and it's also about getting water into communities, to members who haven't had the benefit through no fault of their own of getting it. And that's what I'm proud of as a government. I do certainly regret that we were in a situation as a country that we consider to be the best in the world, but wasn't serving Indigenous peoples properly. It goes to perhaps every issue that I cover. But I'm glad we did have that ability to sit down, didn't have to be in an adversarial position, debating, perhaps petty points of law. We got this done, and we'll continue to get it done. And now we have an agreement that will have teeth.
Thank you, Brett. Thank you, everyone, for joining. This concludes today's press conference. Ceci m'a fait à la conférence de presse. Merci beaucoup.